Welcome everybody to the Making Sense Financial Literacy and Economic Education for Pennsylvania Teachers webinar. Today is February 19th, 2014, and we're glad that you are joining us for the fifth webinar in this 2013-2014 school year series. My name is Hilary Hunt, and I'll be kicking off our agenda here with a webinar overview and instructions. I'm the Making Sense project coordinator for this project, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today. The Making Sense webinars are a partnership between the Pennsylvania Department of Education and Penn State University, and they're part of a series of financial literacy and economic education initiatives between the two entities called for by legislation that was passed back in 2010 by our state legislature. The goals of our program are threefold: to provide curriculum resources for teachers and educators that can be immediately put into place in the classroom, enhance content knowledge, and also provide some professional information. And so whether it's the webinars or other pieces of this project, we try and incorporate as much as we can in each of those three areas. Act 48 credit is provided for all those that participate live during our session. Unfortunately, we cannot offer it to those that are viewing this after today's date. In order to provide the Act 48 credit for those that are logged in, must stay logged on throughout the entire program. And at the end of the session, I'll be providing you with a link to complete an evaluation and provide your information for Act 48 credit processing. I do ask that you allow at least 6 to 8 weeks, if not more, for the processing of that Act 48 credit by PDE. Finally, I'd like to just thank our project partners, Sally Flaherty from the Pennsylvania Department of Education and Dr. Kathy Bowen, professor at Penn State University. And with that, I will move us along to the next piece of our agenda, the online games that teach personal finance and or economics. And again, this is a piece that I will be talking about, and I'm actually really excited about this topic because I think it's a lot of fun. Obviously, games are an enjoyable thing and something that really can add a lot of excitement to your classroom. But before we get into which games are out there and what they can be used for, I thought I would just start with sort of an introduction in terms of the ways to use online games. And so some of those ways to use online games. Obviously, you can reinforce instructional content. Taking the opportunity to review, for example, material that you've already used and reinforce what it is that you've been teaching in the classroom. Another is to use it to increase student engagement. In other words, just taking it a normal everyday topic, or what you might do as sort of the normal presentation of a topic, and get kids a little bit more actively involved and engaged through the use of online games. Another one I think is really sort of important and sometimes overlooked is the ability to provide sort of real-life scenarios in a much less risky format. So there's one that really sticks out in my mind that we'll talk about in a little while, but sort of the stock market game, for example, is a perfect example of that, where students get the opportunity to invest in a hypothetical portfolio without that real-life risk of losing their money. So a nice, safe scenario and way for students to experience some of those real-life situations without the risk that the real world presents. Using games can allow for differentiation, so whether that be to allow maybe some of your advanced students to go on and do something that's still on task while you work with a small group of students that are maybe struggling with the content area, or whether you want to have different students that need different reinforcement, do different games or different applications in the classroom. Another great thing. At-home reinforcement. I don't know about you guys, but I think just about every school district across the state is suffering with an overabundance lately of snow days and 2-hour delays. I think we're up to a total of about 13 between the two here in my home district. But something that you might want to consider is maybe providing a list of some of these for students to do when they're at home. Perhaps you can offer extra credit for some of the ones at the more elementary level. Some of these would be great for young kids to do with their parents at home. So lots of different ways that you can think about using some of these games in your classroom or with your students. So this is a list of the providers of online games that we're going to be talking about today. This is by no means a comprehensive list. There are still plenty of other organizations out there that have developed online games that address personal finance. And this doesn't even include any of the games that really could just be adapted to personal finance. So any of the things like different review games or other things where you can insert your own vocabulary words or other types of things, those would be above and beyond all these. These are just very specific to personal finance or economics. So you see them coming from a variety of different venues, a lot of them out of the nonprofit sector, some from the government, quasi-governmental side, as well as the for-profit side. I tended to focus on the ones that I picked to share today more on the government and nonprofit side, but I will show you a couple from the profit side as well. As with anything that's provided to you, you want to take a look at what are the various features of it? Does it meet your needs? And is there any type of a marketing or underlying message? I feel very comfortable sharing with you the ones that I'm sharing today, but I do encourage you at any product that you look at, whether it be from a nonprofit organization or from a for-profit entity, to be very discerning customers of those products on behalf of your students. All right, so that said, talking about being discerning customers and consumers, let's get started here with our first one, which is Mongo. All right, we're going to do a lot of raising hands on this because I'm just curious how many of you have seen some of these different games. So raise your hand, that little button there with the hand and the arrow, if you've ever heard of the game Mongo. This is from the Federal Trade Commission, and my guess is I'm not going to see too many hands. All right, I'm seeing 2 hands out of our 25 or so folks that we have on. So this is new to most of you. I love their phrase. They refer to this as education instead of education. I just think that's kind of clever. And that this is really promoting the idea of teaching kids to be savvy consumers and consumers of advertisement. I don't know about you, but I'm constantly overwhelmed by the amount of ads that our young people are seeing. The grades on this, the grade level that they promote it for is grades 5 and up, but I will be honest with you, as I was playing around with all of these games, all of them I'd had experience with in the past, but I wanted to refresh myself before the session. I'll tell you, I was playing it, and I will confess that I'm not a video gamer, and this one has definitely has a video game feel in that you have to maneuver your little person up and over and down using arrows and space bars and all that sort of stuff, and I couldn't progress very far. I had to engage the help of my 8-year-old son in order to get me a little further. So I would encourage you, if you're going to take a look at this one, if you're not a video gamer, enlist the help of a younger video game savvy young person to help you progress so that you can really get to the good content in this one. But it's really neat. Students are work their way through the video game, like I said, jumping over things, climbing, getting themselves to higher levels, and they find all sorts of different ads, and they're looking at them and discerning what's the purpose of the ad, and what is it used for, and they're all done in different settings. So in one level, it's all outdoor advertisements. So we're looking at billboards and the thing at the bus stop and all sorts of different kinds, and then other ones that are found in the house and elsewhere. It does have teacher resources that are available, so there's some really good lessons. They also just have ads that you can download. So you might say, hey, this isn't really necessarily a fit, but hey, I would love to have some ads and some materials that would go along with it that I can share with my students and we could talk about that maybe aren't specific to an actual company, so you don't feel like you're picking on a specific product or what have you. So I encourage you to check this one out. I think it's a lot of fun, and again, it is very, very much a sort of modern video game platform that I think students would really enjoy. Your students do create a username and a password on this so they can come back in. They can save their progress. So that's something that I like as well. If you don't have time to finish it, say for example in a class period, they could log back on, or they could log in and do this one at home and come back and pick it back up at a later time. The second one that I want to show you is one of the ones by the private sector, and I think it's a really neat partnership. And this one is called the Great Piggy Bank Adventure. Okay, I've lowered everybody's hands again, and I'm going to ask for everybody to raise their hand again on this one if you have ever heard of the Great Piggy Bank Adventure by Disney and T. Rowe Price. Now, I will tell you that this is both an online game and an actual experience. If you have the opportunity to go down to Epcot at Disney, I just happened to have been there this last month. I'm still trying to figure out if there's a way that I can make it a tax write-off because I visited the Great Piggy Bank Adventure while I was there. It's a really neat experiential portion in the Innovation Center at Epcot. But their online is actually, I think, even more fun, quite frankly, than the real-life one that they have at Disney. But the whole thing was done with the Imagineers at Disney, and it's just incredibly well done in terms of a really rich video game experience. This one is targeted at elementary level, but I gotta say, I think you could really use it all the way up through at least probably 8th grade, if not even further. I think there's some high school students that would also enjoy it. I've given you 2 links on the PowerPoint, and you'll get these on the note taker as well. The second link that's on the PowerPoint slide there at the bottom is really hard to find if you're just on the regular website. So I wanted to give you a direct link and how to get to the teacher materials, and there's a lot of really good resources and materials available for teachers to do this as well. You can have students play this in a team as well, so if you don't want to just plop every kid down on a computer and have them doing it all quietly, if you want to still have some interaction and talking between your kids, you can have up to 4 players playing at one computer at a time. Might also make a difference if you don't have so many computers available to you. Players play different levels, or you can just play the mini games. So you can do the whole thing all together, or you can just do different components. But at each level, you're choosing a different goal at each level. So the first level, it's really sort of a short-term goal. That's the screen capture that I have there on the left-hand side, top left. That's the character I chose. You get to personalize your character as well. But you can save for a pet, you can save for art, lessons and supplies, a little remote helicopter, a tree house, or a basketball goal. So these are deemed sort of short-term goals that you're saving for. And then you earn truffles as you go through sort of this game board where you, in some cases, land on a space where you have to answer a question correctly. And if you answer that correctly, then you earn additional truffles. Or you may get sort of a chance kind of card where you're given the opportunity to make a decision. Depending on how what you decide, you may earn or lose truffles as well. Why truffles? I was told by the folks at T. Rowe Price that helped to develop this that they chose that because they're, especially with Disney as a partner, they have a very international market, so they didn't want to just do dollars or euros. They wanted something that was sort of universal, so I thought that was kind of cute. What's interesting in this is they've done a really good job of incorporating the concepts of inflation, as well as in the upper levels talking about risk versus reward and asset allocation. So I really think there's some really neat things that can be done with this, and I'd strongly encourage checking this one out. The next one that I want to talk about is the stock market game, and I'm going to guess that more of you have heard of this one than our previous two. So go ahead and give me a raising of hands if you have any familiarity with the stock market game. Yeah, definitely seeing a lot more hands going up on this one. Okay, so this one is, well, part of the reason it's probably so popular is it's been around since the 1970s. And for full disclosure, once upon a time, I did some work for the folks that run the stock market game program nationally. It's now called the SIFMA Foundation that does this. But this organization, they've been running this program back since the 1970s, and I can still remember when I got involved with the program in the late 90s, when it was a program where students filled out their stock trades and you actually mailed them or faxed them in. So we've come a long way since then with this program. It's all online. There's an app for it. There's a lot of great got a lot of great technology that goes along with it. But basically, students invest in a hypothetical portfolio. They can, this is some people, maybe if you haven't played it in a while, you're familiar with the old version that was just stocks. Now you can do stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. So it's a really nice way to teach about sort of the risk to return relationship with investments, as well as looking at risk tolerance. I know a lot of other teachers that do all sorts of different things with this game, and there's a ton of materials available for teachers in the Teacher Support Center to help you teach the math, teach the writing. They have an Invest Right program, which is actually a contest that they do every year so that students write about what it is that they've been learning. This is one of the few programs that's had some really good research that's been done and some studies on it that have actually shown student achievement and engagement has gone up. In some cases, especially where schools have challenges meeting their average daily attendance, they'll find that when they're playing the stock market game that more students actually show up for school. So it really has a lot of benefits in a lot of different ways. This is the only one of all the ones that I'm showing you guys today that has a cost. In Pennsylvania, the price right now is $15 per team. It's $25 if you choose the year-long game. That $15 one is for either the fall or the spring. And it's used for grades 4 and up. And the primary website is stockmarketgame.org. So you can go there. You can actually view some of the materials in the Teacher Resource Center just to get a feel for some of what is there. Once you have a login and have paid for your students to participate, then you get access to much more in the way of lesson plans and curriculum. And again, that cost is per team, so you can have a team of students be 2 kids or 5 kids or whatever you deem appropriate for a team of students. So that's definitely one to look at and consider. The next one is a very different one from any of the ones that we've looked at before. It really focuses in on a very specific topic, and that is investment fraud. And this one is probably less a game than it is more sort of an interactive cartoon. So this Fraud Scene Investigator was developed by the North American Securities Administrators Association. I like to call them the other NASA. They call themselves NASA with their acronym there. And in this, really geared at the high school level, students learn about investment fraud and securities regulation. It also has some teacher resources that go along with it. And I would encourage you, if this is an area that you're interested in, to also consider reaching out to what is now the Pennsylvania Department of Banking and Securities. It used to be the Pennsylvania Securities Commission, but those two agencies merged somewhat recently. So either Tina Kostelis or Doug Hasselbein, the securities side of things would be more than happy to help you with this and or provide additional resources that you can teach about investor education topics, in particular with this investment fraud. So it's really kind of neat. It's about the cartoon is about a young man that goes to visit his grandmother and sees from her mail that she's gotten drawn into a pretty bad deal for an investment. All right, the next one we want to look at is Jeni Revolution, and this one is from the Council for Economic Education. They put out a lot of different personal finance and economic education curriculum. Some of you may be familiar with the Keys to Financial Success program that the Federal Reserve Bank out of Philadelphia does. That program draws some on the financial fitness for life and a little bit on the learning, earning, and investing, which is the curriculum that this is meant to go along with, or was designed to complement that learning, earning, and investing curriculum. I noted that there, and that program by itself has a $29.95 charge. That's just a series of lessons. The game, however, is free, so you can play the game without having those lessons available to you. But you can choose from 15 interactive missions. They kind of remind me a little bit of like the Mission Impossible sort of thing. And you earn points as you learn about different things as you go along in this each of the missions. And they're kind of neat. They talk about like the Murktide invasion and all sorts of other different kinds of cool things. It's, I think very I don't know, it kind of, to me, sort of goes along with the whole sort of trend in some of the young adult literature and those kinds of things, and sort of the look and feel in all of it. So anyhow, I think it would be, it's definitely on target for appealing to that teen and or tween level. So this one's a neat one. I think, again, very much tied to the personal finance concepts, but also with a bit of economics in it as well. You choose your character and go through this as well. The different resources have different special powers, and you earn different money and points accordingly throughout the game. We did have a question. I'll just go back to that slide for just a minute about the department, which department it is at the state that deals with the securities and the investor education, and that's the Pennsylvania Department of Banking and Securities. And if you're interested, you can shoot me an email, and I'd be happy to get you specific contact information. Or if you just go on Google Pennsylvania Department of Banking and Securities Investor Education, you'll get right there. It's Tina and or Doug are the two folks that do investor education there, and we'll be happy to be of assistance to you. All right, so the next set of, let's see, what do we have? 8 games here, all come to us from Visa, which are all under their sort of the overarching umbrella of Practical Money Skills for Life, which is their big financial education sort of initiative. And so they've developed a series of different games that range in complexity and grade level and the different topics of personal finance. So I'm just going to quickly go through those. Some of you may have heard of one or more of them, but I'll just give you sort of a snapshot of what they look like. The link at the bottom here is going to provide you with links to all of the rest of those. Some of them that have their own shortcut or direct link, but some of them you can only get to from that page. So you'll see those as we go through. Probably the most popular of all of theirs, and I know that we've promoted this before, and I think I just saw a school that just asked me about a mailing they got in the mail with a disc with financial football on it that was sent out from our state treasurer's office here in Pennsylvania. So this has been continuing to be promoted. You can do it online or by the disc, but financial football is done in partnership with Visa and the NFL, and you gain or lose yards as you answer questions. And so if you answer a question correctly, then you get the choice on your next move of whether or not you want to try something easy. So you can, if you kind of squint and look at that screen, the top left on the Steelers, I picked the Steelers for some of you guys, are on offense, and you have the choice of a passing game or a running game and something that's easy, medium, or hard. I have to confess I'm not a football big fan, so I don't know what any of those mean, other than you're going to do better if you try the hard ones and get it right. But again, it's also kind of like a sort of interesting risk to reward sort of thing. The hard ones are going to be harder questions, and you can either gain or lose more. So anyhow, it's kind of neat. All those that are football fans tend to love it. They say the rookie level is that 11 to 13. This one, I will confess, I have the app on our iPad at home, and my 8-year-old son loves it. He gets some help from us sometimes on the questions that he isn't able to answer, especially at those harder difficulty levels. But he thinks this is a great game to play. So, anybody ever played this? Anybody want to pop in there with a question or a comment about how they've used this one before? I'll keep my eyes open here for that one. All right, I'm seeing some folks saying that it's awesome. You can pick your teams, by the way, so you can pick your team and your opponent, or you can choose to play just single-sided and not against another opponent. So, anyhow, very similar to this one, and again, there's different levels there. They call them Rookie, Pro, and Hall of Fame at various levels, but very similar to that is going to be Financial Soccer, which, again, pretty much the same exact sort of notion, except this was actually done more by Visa for their international audience, for whom soccer is a much bigger deal than football. But as a soccer mom, I actually kind of get this one a little bit more than I do the football one. So anyhow, again, you have the choice of making moves that are, or passes or scoring that are easy, medium, or hard. They're going to associate to the appropriate level of questions that you're going to get, and that'll determine whether or not you're successful in that pass or that score or what have you. Both financial football and financial soccer have a choice as to what the duration of your game will be, the level, and what have you. This one, again, has the same age level breakdowns. They just have a different name. Both of these do have associated lesson plans, and so there's some great supplemental materials that go along with each of these. All right, this one's a very different one, still from Visa, but this one's a really basic one. This is primarily about identifying coins and counting coins. So personally, I think this would be very good kindergarten, first, second grade, where students are identifying, and in that top left-hand one, they're just, and also goes hand in hand, I think, with very age appropriate for that age that's maybe their first time in the computer lab learning to use a mouse. So on our afternoon sessions, we don't get very many of the elementary crowd since most of them are still wrapping up their school day, but this might be one that you want to pass along to maybe some of the folks that run the computer labs at the elementary schools. This is a great just way for them to reinforce their mouse skills and to learn about coins as well. So in the first one, they're sorting them into jars by whether or not they're pennies, nickels, dimes, or quarters. In that other one, they're counting up the coins and determining what the total is. The third version of this, or third level of this, students count up 2 sets of coins and determine which one is greater and move the skateboard to whichever side it is. So again, a pretty basic one, but great for those lower grade levels and getting their sort of making sense of the coins. This one, again, is actually probably very, very basic. It really is just a matter of taking a puzzle of a $1 or $5 or $20 bill and putting it back together. But again, reinforces those math concepts, and you could really be looking at the components of any of those bills as well. This countdown to retirement is another one by Visa, and students select a character with an associated salary, and then they make choices about their housing, how they want to live, mansion, or let's say still live at home or anything in between, their transportation options, and then they also look at debt that they have to pay off, as well as saving for retirement. And as it says, countdown to retirement, it is literally each round sort of is counting down the number of years until you retire. And there's different opportunity and chance kinds of things that happen along the way, lose some money, earn some money, get promotions, that kind of thing. And then it determines how well you're going to be able to live in retirement. So, it's a neat. Again, like I said earlier, some of these provide opportunities for folks to sort of play with real-life skills without any other risk. And this would be one of those in a pretty simplified way, but it's fun and engaging. This is Eds Bank, also by Visa, and here you are moving the coins from a scrolling bar up at the top down into your piggy bank. One thing for kids to learn or figure out, depending on how you want to do this in a classroom, is, hey, if you grab that $50 or the quarter every time, you're going to end up with a lot more in your piggy bank than if you just grab every penny that goes by. And then once you see how much money you have, then you can go and shop for items in the little virtual store. And then you can go back and you can put more money in your piggy bank, and you can go shopping again. So sort of reinforces that notion of you got to have money in order to be able to buy things, and that sometimes you don't have enough money to buy the stuff that you want, so you have to put more money in that piggy bank before you'll be able to do that. So again, very simple, simplistic kind of thing, but appropriate for the elementary grade levels. All right, I'm seeing a couple of questions come in, and I'm going to come back and answer those in just a few minutes as well. Don't want you guys to think I'm ignoring you. All right, and then next up we have Money Metropolis, also by Visa, and I will tell you, I really kind of think this one's pretty cute. Again, you personalize your character, and then you set a savings goal. So here at the top, we see your goal. What do you want to save for? Pick your savings goal and save enough money to make it yours. And these are just 3 options. You can scroll through with those previous and next to figure out other ones, but these are all, I think, pretty appropriate dollar amounts. As some things you see, the dollar amounts that they say things cost just are completely unrealistic. But I think this one is actually pretty right on. Once you've identified that goal, then you go around town on the map, and you earn money different places, and in some cases you have to spend money before you earn money. So at the bottom I showed where I chose to go to the hardware store and buy a leaf blower, and so when the timer's running down, I can blow leaves at a whole lot more yards than if I was raking them, but I had to spend the money on that blower. First I had to earn money to be able to buy the blower, then I had to buy the blower so that I could do the leaves. Some of the places that you went, you were given the choice of babysitting, raking leaves, or mowing the lawn. But if you hadn't earned enough money yet to buy a rake or a blower or a lawnmower, really your only option was to do the babysitting. So anyhow, there's really some neat connections, and I thought this was pretty well done as well. Again, I think this could be used really sort of for intermediate grade levels, probably anything 3 to 8 you could do. And this next one is our last one from Visa. This is the Road Trip to Savings. Oops, I'm seeing a typo in there. I apologize for that. But that one is another one that's kind of cute. This one's a little bit more, again, I would say a little more gamey. That's the other thing I think is interesting. Some of these you kind of have to look at whether or not they're more using the mouse or using the arrows. This one's an arrows and spacebar one. But anyhow, you are trying to maneuver your car, and so that you hit the things that you want to earn and that you have to spend money on and avoid the other ones. So you're trying to get money for things like painting the garage, delivering the pizzas, delivering newspapers, avoiding the ones where you're spending money. So anyhow, it's but the other thing is it has gauges there for your gasoline level and your insurance. So if you don't get enough gas along the way and you run out of gas, game over. If you don't pay for insurance along the way, again, game over. So again, kind of a neat little simulation, pretty easy to do. This next set of games all come from the D2D Fund, which is called short for Doorways to Dreams, and they've sort of gone all in on this notion of gamification in financial education or financial capability, and they call it financial entertainment. And the games that they have, I think, are great. They've all been really well done. Most of these are geared really more towards the secondary level. And I think they're pretty neat. Anybody here, let me lower everybody's hands. Anybody here tried any of these? Just a couple. Okay, so for a lot of you, these are new. All right, so let me just take you through a spin on of these games in our last couple minutes on this topic. First one is Bite Club. This one, you are saving for retirement while running a vampire nightclub. Who makes this stuff up? I would love to know, or I'd like to have their level of creativity. Anyhow, when they go sit at the bar and get a drink, it's by their blood type. Anyhow, it's really kind of fun and sort of plays into the whole vampire culture lately. But anyhow, you earn money by performing tasks. So you're the person working at the club. You go let people in the door. It shows you what they're thinking about, if they want to sit at a couch or if they want to sit at a table, and you put them there. Then it shows you what they're thinking about or want to talk about with somebody else, and you try and get people, make people happy by seating them with other people who have like interests, and they let you know when they're thirsty and want to go get a drink. They let you know when they want to go dance and what kind of music. Anyhow, you earn money by satisfying all of those needs. And then at the end of each round, you have to allocate your money that you've earned to paying down your debt, saving for your short-term savings, and then for retirement. You can also choose to make different improvements to the club so that you can earn more money, but of course you have to spend money to make money. So anyhow, a lot of really neat components to this. It was inspired by a popular game called Diner Dash a number of years ago. This is one of the ones that they have that's also available in Spanish. The next one is Celebrity Calamity. This one is you're sort of a manager for a celebrity, or later on you can be manager for several celebrities. And again, this is one of those where you move your arrows and catch money as it falls down from the sky to pay for things. You also up at the top left. My celebrity wants 4 MP3 players, so I also had to catch 4 MP3 players. And there's a contentedness meter as to how content my celebrity is at this point in time. You move up the career ladder by keeping your client happy and doing what it is that you need to do for them. So earning enough money and paying their bills well and keeping them ahead of things. So anyhow, this one's another one that's pretty cute. This is the only one right now of theirs from the D2D fund that is also available on the iPad. And this one is also available in Spanish. The next one from them is the last one of theirs that's also available in Spanish, this Farm Blitz. And then this one drew on 2 popular games, neither one I have personally played, but I see them pop up on my Facebook feed from time to time, Bejeweled and Farmville. So if anybody's familiar with either of those 2 games, you might enjoy these. You manage your farm resources, so you have to buy seeds, and then depending on how many seeds you bought, you can plant that many plants, and you have to get them in a row. You have to have at least 3 in a row. If you get 4 in a row, you get more money for those ones that are next to other ones. But by buying your seeds, you're accruing debt, which are bunnies, which I think is hysterical because they say that the debt piles up like the bunnies multiply. I think it's a great analogy. Your seeds are your expenses and what you get into debt for buying. You can put money away by buying trees. If you end up needing more money, then you cut down a tree to get at your savings. So there's also things like tornadoes that come through, and so it introduces the concept of risk and what have you. I think you could do a lot of these things, a lot with this one, depending on what you want to talk about with it at either the elementary or the secondary level. I think it really has a wide range that it would appeal to. This Groove Nation, I have to admit I had to read the directions and figure this one out. When you're dancing, you're trying to hit the space bar when the little light up part of the circle comes around. It gets harder the different levels that you get to. But anyhow, you are earning money by your great dance moves on this, and then you budget the money that you've earned and you move up in various levels to this. So once you've done well in San Antonio, you move on to Seattle and other levels of the game. It has both fixed and variable costs. The fixed costs change depending on the venue. So once you decides that your character is buying a pet, then you have pet sitter fees when they go on the road, different things like that. And again, this deals with debt payoffs. Again, I think very realistic, as well as talking about short-term and long-term savings. So this would be great at the secondary level. And then the last one of these that I wanted to talk about was Refund Rush. And this is also by Doorways to Dreams, or the D2D Fund. This would be great to use this time of year. You know, this is most certainly tax season. We're, you know, getting into the heat of it right now. And in this one, the scenario is that you are there to help your client. In this case, the top left is Gary. He's going to get a refund amount of $750. He's 24 years old. He has children. He has some late bills. His financial goal is to buy electronics. He has no accounts. So how are you going to choose to split his refund? In this case, there's two different boxes. Are you doing savings bonds? Are you paying down his late bills? What have you? You obviously need to pick things that don't total more than that $750. And you could just choose to leave a portion of it be a paper check. So the notion is that you can do more than one thing with your refund, and encouraging folks to think out of the box as opposed to just getting a check with those. In each round, you're dealing with 5 different characters, and it looks at how satisfied they are in terms of what you did for each one, and it'll give you some feedback if you want it on, you know, why you did or didn't make good choices in terms of the allocation for their refund splits. So again, I really like this one. I think it would be a neat one to use this time of year with high school students. Okay, and then the last one here is, the last slide that I have for you guys is really just that there are 3 others that I didn't think we would have time to talk about that I just wanted to mention. There are games and multimedia pieces on Federal Reserve System and the Federal Reserve Education website. Todd Zartman was on with us last time and spent a lot of time going over things on that website, so I didn't want to repeat that, but that's another great source. The United States Mint has great things that are focused more on coins in the elementary school level. And another one just from another bank, the TD Bank has the WOW Zone. So again, those are just some other different ones for you to look at. Okay, I've got just a couple minutes here before Andrew comes back on or comes to join us. And I'm just saying that we have some folks that have commented. A lot of folks really like financial football. One person commented they use it as a reward for finishing an assignment early during class. Another one said that their kids really enjoyed financial soccer and football. Another one saying that they play it twice a year to see how much the kids remember and then how much they play ahead. Thomas asked, how do you play the financial football head-to-head? Yeah, you can divide students into teams, and there's an option when you first log in as to whether or not you want to just play one person or head-to-head. When you do that, we've done this, for example, at our old Governor's Institutes that we used to do with the Office of Financial Education. We'd split teachers into teams and have one be the Eagles and one be the Steelers, and then, you know, it sort of can be a competitive type of thing. Anyhow, there's all sorts of different things that you can do it. So anyhow, there's a lot of great stuff. I know I gave you guys way more than you probably can go and look at or use right now, but I'm hoping that of that list and that you thought, hey, there's definitely some ones that I want to go and spend some time and go back and look at. So like I said, you're going to get all of these slides tomorrow. They'll be available for download, or I already gave you that list and the note taker of all of these links as well. So I hope that you'll spend some time looking at those websites and determining which ones might be of use to you for your students. And with that, I am going to turn things over to Andrew. Andrew is going to be discussing interest rates with us this afternoon. And Andrew, I am making you our presenter.
Okay, Hilary, thank you very much. I'm going to get my PowerPoint started here. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about interest rates and interest rate structure. This can get very deep very fast, so I'm going to try to do this in a pretty accessible way to everybody. But I thought it was a good topic for us to talk about, since I know there's been a lot about interest rate determination out there, and you might wonder, oh, I just lost my PowerPoint here. And you might want to know a little bit more about how it is that interest rates come about. I mean, why do they arise and how are they structured? So interest rates are market determined. So this is really important. I think it's a really important thing for you to convey to your students. So we certainly teach and we encourage people to teach about the Federal Reserve's monetary policy, but underlying all of that is the fact that the Fed can influence interest rates, but it doesn't determine interest rates. Interest rates are market determined. So interest rates are prices that are determined by the interaction of supply and demand. And what is the demand here? What's the good that's being demanded? Well, the good that's being demanded is the early use of funds. So if you are looking to borrow money, you're looking to borrow that money in order to be able to use those funds in order to carry out and to use that money to buy something early, to expand your business earlier than you otherwise would be. Because if you didn't have access to credit and the ability to borrow those funds, you'd have to actually wait until you had saved up all the money. I always talk about what would it be like if we had to save all the money that we needed in order to be able to buy a house. So if we didn't have access to mortgages, it could be very difficult. And once upon a time, it was much more difficult in our economy to get a mortgage than it is today. So 30 years ago, you had to have nearly perfect credit in order to be able to get a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage. Of course, suppliers in this market are people who are investing their money, loaning their money in the expectation that they're going to get interest in return for allowing you to use their funds. So savers are ultimately the ones who are actually supplying the funds into this market. So the equilibrium, that is the observed interest rate, then occurs at the rate that makes the plans of the fund demanders, those people who want to borrow, and the fund suppliers, those people who want to save their money and want to earn interest on those savings. What is the interest rate that makes those plans compatible? So at its basic, that's what we're looking at. So I'm trying to do this without showing supply and demand curves and getting into all that technical part. So higher interest rates, of course, mean that borrowing is more expensive. So what's the effect of borrowing becoming more expensive on the economy as a whole? Well, if borrowing is more expensive, then we would expect that households would take out fewer mortgages, take out fewer auto loans, consumer loans, student loans, etc. And the effect of that is then that fewer of those goods and services can be purchased, and so therefore we would expect there to be an effect then on the economy. So for instance, when the overall economy, let's say GDP, is growing very quickly, and let's say that the Fed is fearful of the economy overheating, the primary way that the Fed would slow the economy is by raising interest rates. In a period like we have been in the last couple of years here, you might say, why would the Fed ever want to slow the economy? But if you think back to the early 1980s, when the economy was in stagflation, we had high levels of inflation, and we needed to slow down that growth of the money supply, slow down inflation. We did that by raising interest rates, by making borrowing more expensive, and then we went into a couple of recessions in order to be able to get through that period. Lower interest rates, of course, make borrowing cheaper. So when borrowing is cheaper, that's going to spur economic growth because businesses now might say, hey, this is the time for us to borrow the money that we need in order to be able to expand our factory. Also, households, when interest rates are low, are more likely to say, you know, this is the time for us to get that mortgage and buy a house and stop being a renter. So again, interest rates are market determined. Clearly, for some interest rates, particularly the federal funds rate, which is an interest rate for overnight loans between banks, the Fed has a lot of control and influence over those markets, but the Fed does not have perfect control over interest rates. Let's talk a little bit about patience and interest rates. So in the long run, interest rates tend to be the values that balance those plans of borrowers and lenders, borrowers and savers. So this is over the long run. So one of the things that's hard for some folks to think about is the economists are always talking about the short run versus the long run, and that certainly comes into play a lot here when we're talking about interest rates. So the long run is not an actual determined period of time, but it is a considerable number of years. So over the long run, the trend is going to be for interest rates to balance then supply and demand. So suppliers, these are lenders, they're the patient people. Well, why do I mean they're patient? Well, they're patient because they're the folks who are willing to put off consumption today in order to save their money, lend their money to those who are borrowing, and earn interest. So they're not going to have use of those funds. So think about a CD, a certificate of deposit at a bank. If you put your money in a CD, then it's locked in for whatever the period of time is. So if it's a 6-month CD, then you've locked those funds away for 6 months, and you're not able to then make use of those funds. Now, we know you can get your money out of the CD with an interest rate penalty. If you need to get it out, you can get it out early, but you do pay that early withdrawal penalty. So, but think just about the basics of a CD. When you're locking your money away and you're lending it to someone else for a period of time, then you're going to expect to earn interest, but you also have to be patient. You can't spend then the money that you have lent to someone else. Demanders, or borrowers in this case, demanders of these funds, they are impatient people. And I don't mean impatient with negative connotation, but they're people who want to be able to purchase something today. They're willing to pay in order to borrow someone else's funds in order to make that purchase possible today. So think about the purchase of a home. If we had to wait to save all the money in order to be able to buy a home, we would have to wait a long time. We'd have to be extremely patient. Well, most of us are not that patient. We're much more impatient to be able to have our own home that we can live in, and so we're therefore willing to pay interest in order to borrow someone else's funds in order to be able to buy a home. If there's more credit demanded in the market than is supplied, interest rates will tend to increase. And when interest rates increase, that means then that the most productive of the projects, or I should say maybe the most highly valued of the projects, will be funded. So if interest rates are higher, a business that's contemplating an expansion to its factory, let's say, only those businesses that really see a strong need to be able to expand, they're going to be the ones who are going to actually borrow the money and carry out then those expansions of their factory. And remember, firms largely have to borrow or carry out some other process. It might be equity financing in order to be able to raise the funds to expand. Most firms are not carrying large amounts of savings, if you will, in order to be able to carry out that without entering into credit markets. Credit markets are extremely important, and we should view credit markets as a positive thing. They're something that allows our economy to be able to expand and to grow. If there's less credit demanded in the market than is supplied, interest rates will tend to decrease. And in this case, only the most patient savers are going to offer to accept the smaller interest rate. So think about it this way. We are much more likely to leave extra funds in our checking account where we're not earning interest if interest rates paid on savings accounts are small. because we want to be able to have ready access to the money that's in our savings account. When interest rates are higher, in our checking account, when interest rates are higher, we're much more likely to sweep any excess funds out of our checking account and into our savings account. So only those very patient savers, and I think oftentimes about folks who, for instance, have saved for retirement, they're in retirement, they largely are in fixed income things such like certificates of deposit, municipal bonds, treasury securities, the most secure things, the most secure investments, they're going to be the most patient savers, and they'll be willing to accept lower interest rates when interest rates fall because there's less credit demanded than supplied. So again, think about borrowing of money as being patient versus impatient, but make sure you don't take the view that being impatient is a bad thing. So, to recap, in the long run, the saving and investment plans of market actors are going to jointly determine interest rates. So that is to say, interest rates in the long run will be determined by supply and demand. But in the short run, there are a number of other things that can influence interest rates. So things that will cause interest rates to deviate from the long run supply and demand determined trend. One of them is something called crowding out. Well, what's going on here? Interest rates tend to be higher than the long-run trend when government runs budget deficits. And this is because then the government is entering the borrowing markets, credit markets, in order to borrow, and it's therefore competing with private borrowers for scarce funds. Now, this is true all other things held equal. But when you look at a large economy like the United States, and you look at the fact that the United States, its ability to borrow is unsurpassed by any other nation in the world, a U.S. Treasury security is the U.S. government borrowing from the public or from people that live in another country, that's considered to be very secure. But if you look at small economies in the world, when you see them running budget deficits, it will actually visibly show in terms of increased interest rates. Another thing that can cause interest rates in the short run to deviate from the long run trend, that supply and demand determined trend, is when we run current account deficits. Well, what's a current account deficit? Basically what we're saying there is that imports are exceeding our exports. And as you know, the U.S. for 20, 30 years has run current account deficits. That tends to cause lower interest rates from the trend, so that the short-run interest rates will be lower than that supply and demand determined long-run trend. And this is because the supply of credit is greater than it would have been from domestic sources alone. I'm not going to get into the technical aspects between the current account and the capital account. When I used to teach international economics at the undergraduate level, we used to spend a couple of days on that, so I don't want to get too deep into it. But when your current account deficit is when you have a current account deficit, that is to say you're importing more than you're exporting, it tends to be the case, or it has to be the case then, that you have to run a capital account surplus. And the capital account surplus implies that the rest of the world is lending you money. So when you have a capital account surplus, you are a net borrower. And so the U.S. has been, for the last 20, 30 years, a net capital account borrower. And so as a result of that, that means then that you have a greater supply of credit, and that tends to cause interest rates to be lower. Now, as you all know, when the economy is in recession, interest rates tend to be lower than the long-run trend. And that's because, one, the Fed, or the central bank in a country, in the case of the United States, the central bank is the Federal Reserve, will carry out expansionary monetary policy. It's highly accommodative, and so therefore it tends to result in lower interest rates. The Fed, or the central bank in any country, will increase the money supply, and that will tend to drive interest rates down. But another reason why during recessions interest rates tend to be lower than the long-run trend is because the demand for credit is also low. So when there's lots of uncertainty in the economy and the economy is in recession, companies and for that matter households as well, are much less likely to invest in their capital stock, that is their factories, their homes, etc., and so therefore are less interested in borrowing, and so therefore the demand for credit is lower than it would be during the long run trend, and so therefore interest rates tend to be lower in the short run versus the long run when the economy is in recession. So Federal Reserve monetary policy does have a large effect on interest rates in the United States. But it's important to note that the Federal Reserve influences interest rates. It does not control interest rates perfectly. And that's extremely important, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we talk about the yield curve. So one of the things I think that's difficult is when we teach young people about monetary policy, particularly in high school, we tend as economic educators to make it sound as if the Fed has perfect control over interest rates. And also the media tends to make it sound that way. While we have a lot of influence, we don't control interest rates perfectly. Now, importantly, also another important thing is that there's not just one interest rate in the economy. There are many interest rates. And so I've done a graph here using the St. Louis Fed's FRED database, and this is an excellent database if you want to be able to make graphs and manipulate graphs. They have a tremendous amount of data that's available in there, and you can very easily make graphs. I did this graph in about 5 minutes, and so it produces this graph for you. So what do I have plotted here? Well, I have a bunch of different interest rates. So one is the AAA corporate bond yield. So this is lending to AAA rated companies. They sell bonds, and you hold that IOU if you purchase it, and you're lending the money directly to those corporations. So what's the average there? That's the AAA rate, or yield as we say. BAA, so this is not as high a grade. This is a lower grade corporate bond yield. We have the 30-year conventional fixed rate mortgage. We have a 6-month Treasury bill. And we have a 10-year Treasury note that's also there as well. So we've plotted these out, and what do you notice? Well, yes, they don't all move exactly in lockstep, but overall the trend is for interest rates to move together. So while and also you'll notice here that they tend to be at any one time fairly evenly related to each other. So in other words, what I'm saying is that the relationship between these rates tends over time to remain the same. So one reason is that interest rates move together because they all respond to changes in inflation. So when inflation changes, you're going to expect to see interest rates move as well. And so that's one thing that we certainly see in this case, and we remember that in the late 1970s and early 1980s, inflation was very high, and then it fell over time, and so that's one of the reasons why we see this downward trend from a relatively high point in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Well, one of the reasons that this is important is because the real interest rate's what's being considered. So you'll hear the discussion of the real versus nominal interest rate. So the real interest rate is the nominal interest rate minus the inflation rate. And we could talk a lot about the difference between real versus nominal, but what matters is the real rate. So if you are earning 2% on a certificate of deposit and the inflation rate is 1.5%, then the real interest rate is 0.5 percentage point. And that's because when you get paid back, you're going to get paid back in dollars that are future dollars, and they will not be worth as much as they are today because of inflation. So interest rates also move together because the premium that the market provides to lenders to lend to riskier borrowers is approximately constant over time. So that's one of the reasons why we see this graph moving relatively in lockstep. So for instance, we would expect that the rate to lend to a AAA rated company would be less. You would earn a lower interest rate or lower yield on that bond than you would to lend to a riskier B-rated company. And so that's what the kind of relationship that you see in the graph. So the purple line there is our AAA rated, and then the top the top there, red line, it's a little hard perhaps to see there, but the top line is the B. So you see the gap that exists there, and that's the premium that the lender gets, the saver if you will, for lending to a riskier company. And those relationships tend to be constant over time. What's one of the very bottom things that you see here would certainly be the short-term U.S. Treasury bill rate. The U.S. Treasury, the United States government, is considered to be a very low-risk loan, a very low-risk place to save your money. Now, interest rate risk also matters. What if interest rates change over time and you're locked into an investment? That matters. So being in a 30-year or a 10-year, let's say, Treasury security, where you've lent the money to the U.S. Treasury for 10 years, that money's locked in. What if interest rates change over that time? You could bear some risk that you would actually wind up worse off than you otherwise would have been by locking yourself into a 10-year rather than having 10 consecutive one-year Treasury securities. And so interest rate risk also matters in how interest rates move over time. Now let's start to talk about the yield curve. So this is actually a graph that comes from stockcharts.com showing the dynamic yield curve, and this is the yield curve for today. So this is a graphical depiction of the term structure of interest rates over time. So it's easy to understand what you have on the vertical axis there. This is the interest rate or the yield on various different Treasury securities. Now, the Treasury securities that are plotted along the red line have different yield terms, different terms. So starting on the very far left near the axis, you have the shortest duration security going all the way out to the 30-year on the far end. So you would expect to earn a higher interest rate on a 30-year investment than you would on a very short 1 month, 3 month, etc. type investment. And the reason for that is what I just talked about. If you lock into 30-year investment, how does that differ from 31-year investments where you would simply renew every year your investment? Well, one of them is that we know that interest rates will change over time, and so therefore you should get a premium from the fact that you are locked into a 30-year rather than a shorter term investment. So that's what's going on here. So what you're seeing here is a plot of where are interest rates on different maturity securities, securities that are at different maturity time horizons. So if it's a 10-year security, a 20-year security, a 30-year security, you get different interest rates depending on how long you invest your money, or vice versa. Borrowers have to pay more to borrow money for longer periods of time. So the yield curve can be very valuable in terms of showing us what expectations are also that the market has about interest rates over time. So I've shown the one on the left for today, or for yesterday, excuse me, February 18th. Here's a yield curve on the right for June 21st, 2007, before the financial crisis. Well, what is this yield curve showing us? This yield curve is showing that the market at that time expected interest rates to be relatively constant over time. So short-term interest rates would not change much over the 3-month to 30-year time horizon. That's what is being reflected there. On our current yield curve, what's being reflected there is that market participants expect that interest rates will rise over time. And so they're low today, but they expect them to be higher in the future. So upward sloping yield curve, like the one we have today, implies that markets expect short-term interest rates to increase over time. A horizontal yield curve implies that markets expect future short-term interest rates to be about the same as the current short-term interest rates. So what does that mean? Go back and look at the flat one. That means on June 21st, 2007, market participants expected that interest rates on an overnight loan or a very short loan were about 4.65%. They also expected that 20 years from then, so on June 21st, 2027, they expected short-term interest rates to not be much higher than they were in 2007. Downward sloping yield curves imply that markets expect future interest rates to be higher than current short-term rates. That actually should be the other way around. Downward sloping curves imply that market participants expect future short-term interest rates to be lower than current short-term interest rates. So with the last couple minutes here, let's just talk a little bit about the Federal Reserve's policies over the last few years since the financial crisis, and particularly with regard to these so-called large-scale asset purchases, which have been commonly called quantitative easing. So you had QE1, you had QE2, and you had QE3. Now what you're probably saying to me is I've got the wrong QE. Now as Hilary and perhaps other folks that know me that are on the webinar know, I like to go on cruises a lot. When I first started hearing the media talking about QE2, I thought about the ship. And by the way, this is the new Queen Elizabeth that was launched a few years ago. But that's not what we're talking about. What are we talking about? Well, we're talking about these large-scale asset purchases where the Federal Reserve went into the open market and purchased large amounts of highly secured, high-quality Fannie and Freddie secured mortgages as well as Treasury securities in order to lower the long end of the yield curve. So we are able to carry out monetary policy, carry out open market operations in our normal way in order to lower the low end, the short end of the yield curve. But in order to lower the longer end, we needed to be able to carry out these large-scale asset purchases. By doing this, it makes it less expensive for businesses and households to borrow, and that spurs economic growth. So let's just look at QE1. So here is June 2008. This is really before the real tremendous brunt of the financial crisis came about. Compare these two yield curves. June 30th, 2010 on the right-hand side is about the end of the first set of these large-scale asset purchases. The short end has been brought down over this period by monetary policy bringing interest rates on the federal funds rate very low. And then the long end has been brought down by the Federal Reserve carrying out these large-scale asset purchases. We also carried out the second one, which was between roughly November and August or September of 2011. And you can see here that, again, the long end of the curve has been brought down. Now, not nearly as much as it was before in the QE1, but nonetheless, think about what would have happened if you didn't have this. It likely would mean that the curve would have gotten steeper. And then more recently, we've had QE3. QE3 also worked to try to bring the long end down. Now, it was started to lift at the very end of 2013 as the Fed signaled in its last meeting in December of 2013 that it would scale back these large-scale asset purchases. But nonetheless, we worked to keep the yield curve down and lower as a result of these large-scale asset purchases. So some quick sources. I use the FRED database. That's at the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. I use stockcharts.com, and there's the URL that you can go to and actually play around with the yield curve. And then I also used some material from Mike Salemi, a professor emeritus from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, his Money and Banking course that's available from thegreatcourses.com. This is actually a pay site, but it's a great course that you can take a look at. I want to just show you very quickly, and maybe you can see this animation. We're going to start here in June of 2007, before the financial crisis. Watch the yield curve on the left as I animate through time. You notice that the curve was very flat in 2007. Now, as we start to go into the financial crisis, it begins to steepen as the Fed cuts interest rates. It goes very, very, very flat or very low on the short end, and then as the Fed carries out these quantitative easing programs, these large-scale asset purchases, you can watch as through each of these programs the yield curve is pushed down on the far end, the 20 and 30-year end. So right now we're showing May of 2010. We're going continue to go through these programs, and you'll see how the curve tends to try to push upwards when the programs are lifted or they're coming to the end, and then the new quantitative easing programs come into place in order to push the curve back down. So I'm hoping you get a chance to see that little animation. If you don't, you can go to that URL and check it out on your own. So wrapping up, I just wanted to mention a couple of programs that are coming up at the Philly Fed. We have our Keys to Financial Success training. That's going to be July 7th to 11th, 2014 here in Philadelphia. Contact my colleague Todd Zartman by email if you're interested in coming to that. That's the program we do to train high school teachers to teach their own high school personal finance course. We give you all the materials free of charge to teach that program. We have Making Sense of Money and Banking again this year. This is our 10th anniversary. It's moving to the 4th week in July this year, so it's July 21 to the 25th, 2014. Registration is not open yet, but it will be this spring at philadelphiafed.org/education. And both of these programs are at the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. So I hope that this little primer has given you a little bit of ideas about interest rate determination, about what the yield curve is, and what it can show you. And I'm going to pass things back to Hilary now.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Everybody join me in thanking Andrew. And we are grateful, Andrew, that you were able to enlighten us. I know sometimes we focus on different topics, and this was, I think, a really good one to go more in depth, focusing on both really both the personal finance and the econ, really, I think. So again, thank you, Andrew, and appreciate you being here. All right, so in the time that we have left, I want to talk about a couple of things that we have coming up, and quite selfishly ask for a little bit of help. So I'm going to talk about some surveys of teachers, some that have been done, and one that we're going to try again here shortly to do. And so let me start with sort of where we've been. So what do we know right now about personal finance across the state? I talked a little bit about some of the reports that have come out that share some of the data in previous webinars, and really when it comes down to it, we kind of know pieces and parts of information from across the Commonwealth, and a lot of those are just sort of a snapshot in time. One of the challenges with wrapping our arms around which of the 500 school districts in Pennsylvania are currently teaching, offering, requiring courses work in personal finance, and whether or not it's a semester or a standalone, integrated, done in business or family consumer science or math. It's constantly changing, and sometimes that's very challenging for us to wrap our arms around. But we like to continue to have a sort of a sense of where it is, how much has changed, are we seeing increases or decreases across the state, and what are some of those trends. We also actually know a little bit more about personal finance than we do about economics. Our past efforts, if you've been around and maybe have gotten some of these in the past, we did 2 big comprehensive phone and web surveys back in 2007 and 2009 with the Office of Financial Education in Penn State. Those phone calls all went actually to guidance counselors at the high schools. It's focused only on high schools and was focused specifically on personal finance. And then we did a teacher web survey with the Investor Protection Trust, the Pennsylvania Securities and Commission, and Penn State in 2009. That looked at a lot of what the professional development needs were and how comfortable teachers were teaching personal finance and investor topics. And again, that was focused specifically at the high school. The first one that we did more broadly was an online survey back in 2012 as part of the Making Sense project. And that's the one that we're looking more at repeating this time in terms of the functionality. It'll be an online survey again. And then we did a mailed survey just last summer. Unfortunately, we didn't get nearly the return rate that we were hoping for on that. We did provide, and that one actually to every principal in the state, but still we did not get as high of a percentage of returns on that as we had hoped for, even though we did do an incentive for folks to respond to those. So we thought we would share with you what we're trying to do so that you can maybe help us to garner some more participation. We're looking for all educators, so this will go out to all educators on our distribution list. So you guys, by virtue of being on our webinars and getting our newsletters, will get it. And then any other educators in Pennsylvania that we can reach through each of your networks and others. It'll be a short 10-minute or less online survey that'll be done later this spring using SurveyMonkey. So the same thing that you guys will be using to take your evaluation or do your evaluation at the end. And we're going to be looking at, what's being taught, what resources are used, and what are folks' needs going forward. Quite frankly, as every year goes by, it's a challenge sometimes to continue to make the case for an investment at the state level in financial education. It's dwindled significantly over the years from when we had an Office of Financial Education dedicated to this effort to what we're doing now. So we can really use some help in demonstrating that the services that we're providing are helpful and needed and necessary going forward. So what can you do? Share the survey within your building with your administrators, other teachers in your district, professional associations, statewide, local, college, university connections. Send it via email. Share it on social media. Put it on Facebook with teachers that that you may have in your connections. Discuss it at department meetings or the meetings of your association or others. The data will be used and made available once compiled. You might be able to use it to help make the case for personal finance, identify what other folks are doing, some best practices, as well as meet professional goals. I know some folks that are in the new teacher effectiveness process looking for other things to go along with that in their evaluation. So there might be a component of being able to use some of this data to help you with that as well. One piece that I'm interested in from each of you is what information would be helpful for you to know from other teachers across the state. And so that's really my big ask today, is that you let me know what it is that you would want on that survey, so that so we can be sure to be asking those questions. And then finally, just to wrap things up here before we go this afternoon, we have just a few sort of closing ends here. You can always connect with us on Facebook. We also have a Pinterest page with lots of boards there if you're on Pinterest, as well as on Twitter. And here's our Twitter. We don't tweet a lot, but if you're on there, if you look at who we follow, you'll find a lot of folks that do actively tweet, and you can get lots of information and follow along with a lot of those folks there as well. And then certainly I'd encourage you to make sure that you are getting our e-blasts. If you're not receiving all of these consistently, make sure that we have your both home and school email addresses, and I'd encourage you to add my email address to your address book so that you can continue to get those and not have them blocked by your spam filter. Finally, we have one last webinar coming up for this session. We'll be releasing the topics for that soon, but we hope that you'll be able to join us for that session coming up in March. And if anybody has any questions, I'll be staying on, but we appreciate, again, you participating here today with us and hope that you'll be joining us for future webinars.